The fluorescent lights of Whitmore Logistics hummed above the warehouse floor as Ethan Cole stood frozen, his 7-year-old daughter Lily's hand gripping his work jacket. Victoria Whitmore, CEO and sole heir to the company's fortune, had just spoken the words that would shatter everything he had endured in silence for 3 years. Her voice carried across the loading dock, cold and absolute, declaring him terminated for theft he had never committed. But it was not the accusation that broke him. It was the way Lily looked up at him, searching his face for an answer he could not give. Ethan Cole had learned to carry weight long before he ever lifted a crate. At 34, his shoulders bore the invisible burden of a life that had demanded too much too soon. His wife Rachel had passed 4 years ago, leaving him with a 2-year-old daughter in a grief so heavy it threatened to pull him under. He had sold their small home in Columbus, packed what little they owned into a rusted pickup truck, and driven to Cedar Falls, Iowa, because it was far enough from the memories and close enough to nothing. The job at Whitmore Logistics came through a temp agency, warehouse associate, night shift, minimum wage plus 50 cents for the inconvenient hours. Ethan took it without hesitation. He needed steady work, health insurance for Lily, and a reason to keep moving forward when every morning felt like swimming through concrete. 3 years later, he had become a fixture on the loading dock. The other workers respected him, not for his words because Ethan rarely spoke more than necessary, but for his reliability. He arrived early, stayed late, never complained about the overtime that others refused. His supervisor, a gruff man named Patterson, had recommended him twice for promotion. Both times the request had been denied by someone higher up the chain. Lily had grown from a toddler who cried for her mother into a curious, quiet child who understood things no 7-year-old should have to understand. She knew that her father worked nights so he could walk her to school in the mornings. She knew that the apartment they shared had thin walls and a heater that clicked too loudly. But it was theirs. She knew, without ever being told, that money was something they did not have enough of, and love was something they had in abundance. Most evenings before his shift began, Ethan would sit with Lily at their small kitchen table. She would show him her drawings, elaborate scenes of houses with too many windows and families with too many members. He would listen as she explained each figure, assigning them names and stories that revealed more imagination than any child her age should possess. These moments were sacred to him, the only hours where the weight lifted enough for him to breathe. Victoria Whitmore existed in a different universe entirely. At 29, she had inherited a logistics empire that her grandfather had built from a single truck and a handshake. She had returned from an MBA program at Northwestern with theories about efficiency and optimization, determined to prove that her position was earned rather than given. The workers on the floor knew her only by reputation, a distant figure who appeared occasionally on the catwalk above the warehouse, observing their labor like a scientist studying specimens. She had spoken to Ethan exactly once before the day that changed everything. It had been a Tuesday in March, raining hard enough to delay the morning shipments. Victoria had descended from her office to assess the situation personally, her heels clicking against the concrete with an authority that made the workers straighten their spines. She had stopped near Ethan's station, watching him reorganize pallets to accommodate the delayed freight. Her question had been simple enough. Why are you moving those there instead of holding position? Ethan had explained, briefly and without looking up, that the refrigerated units would spoil if they remained in the loading zone during the delay. The dry goods could wait. Victoria had stared at him for a long moment, something flickering behind her eyes that might have been surprise or might have been irritation. She had walked away without another word. Ethan had thought nothing of it. He had learned long ago that people in power rarely saw those beneath them as complete human beings. He was a function, a pair of hands that moved boxes from one place to another. That was acceptable. He did not need Victoria Whitmore to see him. He only needed the paycheck that kept Lily fed and sheltered. But Lily had noticed things that Ethan tried to hide. The way he rubbed his shoulder after particularly brutal shifts. The way he counted the bills from his wallet 3 times before buying groceries. The way he flinched almost imperceptibly when anyone raised their voice in his direction. One evening, as he tucked her into bed, she had asked a question that cut straight through every defense he had built. Why do grown-ups get to hurt people and nobody stops them? Ethan had frozen with his hand on her blanket, unable to form an answer that would not be a lie. Because sometimes, sweetheart, he had finally said, people with power forget that everyone else matters too. But that does not mean you have to forget. That does not mean you ever stop being kind. Lily had nodded, accepting his words with the trust that only children possess. But her question lingered in the air long after she fell asleep, settling into Ethan's chest like a stone he could not dislodge. The unraveling began on a Thursday in October, when the morning fog still clung to the loading docks and the first shipment of the day arrived 3 hours ahead of schedule. Ethan had been pulling a double shift, covering for a coworker whose wife had gone into early labor. His muscles ached and his eyes burned, but the overtime pay would cover Lily's winter coat and still leave enough for the heating bill. Marcus Webb had been watching Ethan for months. As the warehouse operations manager, Webb occupied the uncomfortable middle ground between the workers who distrusted him and the executives who barely acknowledged his existence. He was a man who had climbed just high enough to see what he could never reach, and the view had curdled something inside him. He resented the workers for their solidarity, and he resented the Whitmores for their birthright. Most of all, he resented anyone whose integrity reminded him of everything he had abandoned along the way. Webb had been skimming from the inventory for almost a year, small amounts at first, easily hidden within the acceptable margin of shipping errors. But his gambling debts had grown faster than his caution, and the amounts had escalated until the discrepancies became impossible to ignore. He needed a scapegoat, someone low enough on the ladder that their protest would go unheard, and Ethan Cole, with his stubborn silence and lack of allies in management, was perfect. The accusation came during the afternoon shift change, when the warehouse floor was crowded with workers from both crews. Webb had arranged it deliberately, ensuring maximum witnesses for Ethan's humiliation. He stood beside Victoria Whitmore, who had descended from her office at his urgent request, holding a folder of fabricated evidence that painted Ethan as the source of the inventory losses. Victoria's voice carried across the concrete expanse, amplified by the warehouse's acoustics, until every worker could hear the charges: theft of company property, falsification of shipping records, termination effective immediately, pending a full investigation that would determine whether criminal charges were warranted. Ethan stood motionless as the words washed over him. He could feel the eyes of his co-workers, some sympathetic, others uncertain, a few already believing the lie because believing it was easier than questioning authority. He could feel Webb's satisfied gaze boring into the side of his head, and he could feel, with terrible clarity, the small hand that had slipped into his own. Lily had been waiting in the break room, as she sometimes did when the school ended early and Ethan could not find alternative care. She had heard the commotion and emerged just in time to witness her father being branded a thief in front of everyone he worked with. Ethan looked down at his daughter, at her wide eyes and trembling lip, and made a decision that would cost him everything. He would not fight, he would not raise his voice or defend himself with the fury that burned beneath his ribs. Because fighting would mean lawyers and investigations and newspaper articles, and Lily would be dragged through all of it. Fighting would mean subjecting her to a process that chewed up poor people and spit out whatever remained. He gathered his few possessions from his locker in silence. He signed the termination paperwork without reading it, and he walked out of Whitmore Logistics with his daughter's hand in his, leaving behind 3 years of loyalty and the only stability they had known. That night in their small apartment, Lily asked the question that would haunt both of them. "You did not do what they said, did you, Daddy?" Ethan knelt before her, meeting her eyes with all the conviction he possessed. "No, sweetheart, I did not. And sometimes telling the truth is not enough to make people believe you, but you will always know. That is what matters." But even as he spoke the words, he wondered if they were true. He wondered if knowing was enough when the world seemed determined to prove otherwise. Victoria Whitmore had inherited more than a company from her grandfather. She had inherited his instincts, the same gut feelings that had guided Harold Whitmore from a single delivery truck to a regional logistics empire. And something about the termination of Ethan Cole had triggered those instincts in ways she could not ignore. She told herself it was due diligence. The investigation into the inventory discrepancies would continue regardless of Cole's departure. And as CEO, she had a responsibility to ensure its thoroughness. That was why she found herself reviewing the security footage from the loading docks late one evening, watching hours of mundane labor scroll across her monitor. Ethan Cole was everywhere in the recordings, not stealing, not falsifying records, but working. Working with a quiet efficiency that made the other employees look careless by comparison. She watched him catch a falling crate before it struck a coworker. She watched him stay an extra hour to reorganize a shipment that someone else had mislabeled. She watched him eat lunch alone, reading a paperback novel that was too worn to identify, and she found herself wondering what kind of man chose solitude over the camaraderie of the break room. The footage from the day of his termination answered that question. She had not noticed the child during the confrontation, too focused on the gravity of the accusations and the pressure of Webb's insistence. But the camera had captured everything. The little girl emerging from the break room, the moment she took her father's hand, the way Cole's entire posture changed, shifting from defeated to protective in the span of a heartbeat. Victoria paused the video on that frame, studying the man's face. There was no guilt there, no shame for crimes committed, only a fierce, desperate love for the child beside him and a resignation that suggested he had expected the world to betray him eventually. She closed the laptop and sat in the darkness of her office, wrestling with something she had not felt in years: doubt. The following week, Victoria made an unannounced visit to the loading dock during the morning shift. She told herself it was a routine inspection, but her eyes kept drifting to the station where Ethan Cole had worked. His replacement was a young man who moved with none of Cole's precision, who laughed too loudly at jokes that were not funny, who had already damaged 2 shipments through carelessness. Patterson, the floor supervisor, approached her with the weariness of a man who had learned that executive attention rarely brought good news. "Miss Whitmore, something I can help you with?" Victoria hesitated, then asked a question that surprised them both. "Cole, the man who was terminated, what was your assessment of his work?" Patterson's expression shifted, suspicion giving way to something that looked almost like relief. "Best worker I had, never late, never complained, never cut corners. I recommended him for promotion twice." He paused, weighing his next words carefully. "I don't know what the records say he did, but I know what I saw for 3 years. That man was honest to a fault. It was almost annoying, if I'm being straight with you." Victoria nodded, offering nothing in return. But as she walked back toward her office, she carried Patterson's words like evidence she was not yet ready to examine. The crack widened that Saturday when Victoria stopped at a grocery store on her way home from the office. She rarely shopped for herself, usually delegating such tasks to her assistant, but she had developed a craving for the specific brand of dark chocolate her grandmother used to keep in a crystal dish. The store was crowded with weekend shoppers, families navigating carts through narrow aisles, and Victoria found herself moving through them like a ghost, invisible and impatient. She found the chocolate on the top shelf, just beyond her reach. As she stretched for it, a small voice spoke from somewhere near her elbow. "My daddy can reach that. He is really tall." Victoria looked down into the face of Ethan Cole's daughter. The girl stood beside a shopping cart that contained exactly 4 items, all of them practical, none of them indulgent. Her father was 3 aisles away, comparing prices on canned vegetables with the intensity of someone for whom every dollar mattered. Before Victoria could respond, the girl continued, "You are the lady from Daddy's work, the one who said those things." She did not sound angry. She sounded curious, as though Victoria were a puzzle she was trying to solve. Victoria's throat tightened. She had delivered hundreds of termination speeches, negotiated contracts worth millions, faced down boardrooms full of hostile investors. None of it had prepared her for the steady gaze of a 7-year-old girl who had watched her father be humiliated. "He did not do it," the girl said, her voice carrying a conviction that made Victoria's carefully constructed certainties shiver. "Daddy does not lie. He says lying makes your insides hurt, even when nobody finds out." She tilted her head, studying Victoria with an intensity that felt almost clinical. "Do your insides hurt?" The question hit Victoria with the force of physical impact. She opened her mouth to respond, but Ethan had spotted them. He crossed the distance in quick strides, positioning himself between his daughter and the woman who had taken everything from him. "Lily, time to go." His voice was level, controlled, but Victoria could see the tension in his jaw, the way his hands trembled slightly at his sides. He did not look at her. He took his daughter's hand and walked away, leaving Victoria standing in the baking aisle holding a bar of dark chocolate she no longer wanted. Ethan had found work. Barely. A construction crew needed laborers for a highway project. Cash under the table. No questions asked about his recent employment history. The pay was half what Whitmore Logistics had offered, with none of the benefits, but it kept them fed while he searched for something permanent. Every application asked the same question: reason for leaving previous position. He could not bring himself to lie, and he could not explain the truth in a way that would not raise flags. Terminated for theft, pending investigation. The words were a death sentence in any industry that valued trustworthiness, which was every industry. He told Lily they were on an adventure, finding new paths. She accepted this with the trust she had always given him, though he caught her sometimes staring at the bills on the kitchen table, counting them the way she had learned to count at school. She was too young to understand compound interest or late fees, but she understood enough to know that the pile of envelopes with red stamps was growing. Victoria had started sleeping poorly. She blamed it on the quarterly reports, on the stress of managing a company that employed 400 people, on the pressure of living up to a legacy she had never asked for. But in the honest hours of 3 a.m., she knew the truth. The girl's question haunted her. She returned to the security footage, this time going back months. She watched Webb's movements with new eyes, noting the patterns that had escaped her attention before. The late nights when he was alone in the inventory office. The shipments that passed through his station before showing discrepancies. The careful way he had built a case against Ethan Cole, laying groundwork for weeks before the accusation. The evidence was circumstantial but damning, and the more she looked, the more she realized how thoroughly she had been manipulated. Victoria had climbed a mountain to reach her position, fighting against assumptions about nepotism and gender at every step. She had learned to trust data over intuition, to demand proof before making accusations. And yet, when Marcus Webb had presented his fabricated evidence, she had accepted it without question. She had allowed her own biases about warehouse workers, about men with calloused hands and limited education, to override the judgment she prided herself on. The revelation sickened her. She had thought herself better than this. Ethan was beginning to believe the worst was over. The construction job had become slightly less temporary. One of the crew chiefs had noticed his work ethic and mentioned a permanent position opening in the spring. It would mean health insurance again, stability again, a chance to rebuild what had been torn down. He allowed himself to hope. That was his mistake. Webb had grown nervous as Victoria's questions intensified. He could sense her circling, feel her skepticism like a cold draft through a cracked window. The termination of Ethan Cole should have closed the matter, but somehow it had opened doors instead. He needed to seal them permanently. The solution presented itself with elegant cruelty, a new piece of evidence, more damning than the first, planted in a location that would tie Ethan Cole to the theft beyond any reasonable doubt. A witness carefully coached who would swear they had seen Cole pocketing inventory on multiple occasions. A final nail in a coffin that should have already been buried. The call came on a Wednesday evening, just as Ethan was helping Lily with her homework. A detective from the Cedar Falls Police Department, his voice professionally neutral, informed Ethan that new evidence had emerged in the Whitmore Logistics investigation. He was being asked to come to the station for questioning. Voluntary, the detective emphasized. Though they both knew what voluntary meant when you had no money for lawyers and no power to resist. Ethan hung up the phone and stared at the wall for a long moment. Lily watched him from the kitchen table, her pencil frozen above a worksheet of math problems. "Daddy, is everything okay?" He turned to her, and for the first time in her memory, she saw something break behind his eyes. He crossed the room and knelt beside her, taking both her hands in his. "I need you to remember something, sweetheart. No matter what happens, no matter what anyone tells you, your daddy loves you more than anything in this world. And I did not do what they say I did. Do you understand?" Lily nodded, her eyes filling with tears. She did not fully understand. She understood only that her father was frightened, and that frightened her more than anything else could. "You are quiet," she said, repeating words she had heard him say 100 times, "because quiet does not mean wrong." Ethan pulled her into an embrace and held her until the trembling stopped, for both of them. Victoria discovered Webb's latest manipulation through pure chance. She had been reviewing the new evidence file when she noticed a timestamp that did not match. The footage purporting to show Ethan Cole near the inventory office on the night in question had been recorded on a day when payroll records showed him homesick with a documented fever. His daughter had been ill as well. There was no way he could have been at the warehouse. She called the IT department and demanded a full forensic analysis of the evidence files. The results came back within hours. Multiple files had been altered, metadata had been changed, and the alterations traced back to a single workstation, the one assigned to Marcus Webb. Victoria sat in her office as the sun set over Cedar Falls, watching the sky bleed orange and red through her window. She had built her career on certainty, on decisive action, on never admitting weakness. But certainty had led her here, to the destruction of an innocent man while a guilty one walked freely through her building. She thought about what it would cost to expose Webb. The scandal would damage the company's reputation. Board members would question her judgment for hiring him, for trusting him, for being so thoroughly deceived. Her own position might become untenable. Then she thought about the girl in the grocery store, asking if her insides hurt. She thought about a man who had chosen silence over protest because he loved his daughter more than he loved justice. She thought about the weight of power and how carelessly she had wielded it. The choice, in the end, was not difficult. It was only expensive, and Victoria Whitmore had learned that the most valuable things usually were. The warehouse floor fell silent as Victoria descended the metal stairs from her office, flanked by two security officers and the company's head of legal. Webb stood near his usual station, his expression shifting from confusion to alarm as he registered the gravity of the procession heading toward him. Victoria stopped 3 feet away from him, close enough that her voice would not need to carry, but far enough that no one could claim inappropriate proximity. The workers around them had frozen in place, abandoning their tasks to witness whatever was about to unfold. "Marcus Webb," she said, her voice steady and clear, "I am terminating your employment with Whitmore Logistics effective immediately. You are being charged with falsification of company records, theft of inventory, and deliberately framing an innocent employee for crimes he did not commit." Webb's face contorted through a rapid succession of emotions, shock giving way to denial, denial giving way to calculation, and finally calculation giving way to something approaching panic. "You have no proof," he said, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. Victoria held up a folder thick with documents. "We have surveillance footage that you altered, digital fingerprints tying you to every manipulated file, witness statements from employees you attempted to bribe, and a full forensic audit of the inventory discrepancies that traces every missing item back to your authorization codes." She paused, letting the weight of the evidence settle over him like a shroud. "The police are waiting outside." Webb lunged toward her, some desperate instinct overriding his common sense. The security officers moved with practiced efficiency, restraining him before he could take more than a single step. As they led him toward the exit, he screamed accusations and denials that echoed off the concrete walls, but no one was listening anymore. Victoria watched him go, then turned to face the assembled workers. She had prepared a speech, careful words designed to minimize damage and reassure stakeholders. But looking at the faces before her, people who had labored under Webb's cruelty and doubted their own colleague, she abandoned the script. "I made a mistake," she said, and the admission rippled through the crowd like a stone dropped in still water. "I trusted the wrong person. I failed to investigate thoroughly, and an innocent man paid the price for my failure. His name is Ethan Cole, and I intend to make this right." She did not wait for reactions or questions. There would be time for those later. Right now, there was only one thing that mattered. Ethan was in the police station parking lot when his phone rang. The detective had released him hours ago, the questioning suspended indefinitely pending new information. He had been sitting in his truck, unable to summon the energy to drive home and face his daughter with nothing but uncertainty to offer. The voice on the other end was female, professional, and vaguely familiar. "Mr. Cole, this is Victoria Whitmore. I need to speak with you. I know I have no right to ask anything of you, but please let me explain." Ethan's grip tightened on the phone. 3 months ago, this woman had destroyed his life with a single declaration. She had not asked for his side of the story, had not questioned the evidence presented to her, had not considered that a man who worked double shifts to support his daughter might be something other than a thief. He should hang up. He should let her explain to us his voicemail if she was so desperate to be heard. He should protect himself from whatever new manipulation this might represent. But something in her voice gave him pause, something that sounded almost like genuine remorse, though he had learned to distrust such things from people in positions of power. "The diner on 5th Street," he said finally. "I will give you 10 minutes." Victoria arrived first, sliding into a booth near the back where the overhead light flickered intermittently. She ordered coffee she would not drink and waited, her hands folded on the table in a posture she recognized from board meetings, the posture of someone preparing to deliver difficult news. Ethan entered through the side door, scanning the room with the wariness of a man who had learned to expect betrayal. He spotted her immediately but took his time crossing the distance, as though each step required separate authorization from his wounded pride. He sat across from her without greeting, his expression neutral in a way that revealed more than anger would have. He was not going to make this easy. She did not deserve easy. "Marcus Webb has been arrested," she began. "He was the one stealing from the company. He fabricated the evidence against you. Everything that was said and done to you was based on lies that I failed to see through." She paused, forcing herself to meet his eyes. "I am sorry. I know those words are inadequate. I know they cannot undo what happened. But I am saying them anyway because you deserve to hear them." Ethan remained motionless for a long moment, processing her words with the careful attention of someone who had been burned by carelessness before. Then he spoke, and his voice was rougher than she expected. "My daughter thought I was going to prison. She cried every night for a week because she thought they were going to take her daddy away. Do you know what that does to a 7-year-old? Do you understand what you took from us?" Victoria did not look away, though every instinct urged her to flinch from the pain in his words. "I am beginning to understand, and I do not expect forgiveness. I only came here to tell you that the charges have been dropped permanently. Your record will show that you were wrongfully terminated, and I want to offer you your position back with full back pay for the time you were unemployed and a promotion to the supervisor role that should have been yours 2 years ago." Ethan's laugh was bitter and brief. "You think I want to work for someone who destroyed my reputation on a liar's word?" "No," Victoria shook her head slowly. "I think you want to take care of your daughter, and I think you are too practical to refuse an opportunity because of pride, even justified pride." She slid a folder across the table, identical to the one she had used to condemn Webb. "This is everything, the full investigation, the evidence proving your innocence, Webb's confession. You can share it with whoever you need to, restore your name on your own terms. The job offer stands whether you accept it or not." She rose from the booth, leaving the folder and her untouched coffee behind, but she stopped before reaching the door, turning back one final time. "Your daughter asked me something when I saw her at the store. She asked if my insides hurt." Victoria's voice softened to something almost fragile. "They do. They have for weeks, and they should." She left before he could respond, walking out into a night that suddenly felt less suffocating than it had in months. Ethan returned to Whitmore Logistics on a Monday morning, not because he had forgiven Victoria Whitmore, but because Lily needed stability more than he needed vindication. The workers greeted him with a warmth that surprised him, clapping his shoulders and offering coffee, and generally treating him like a returning hero rather than a disgraced suspect. Patterson shook his hand firmly and said he had always known the truth would come out. Victoria watched from her office window as Ethan resumed his position on the floor. She had expected him to avoid her, to treat her with the professional coldness that the situation warranted. Instead, 3 days into his return, he appeared at her office door with a question about inventory procedures that could have easily been directed to Patterson. She answered the question, and he lingered for a moment after the answer was complete. "My daughter wants to know if you found the chocolate you were looking for at the store." Victoria blinked, thrown by the unexpected reference. "I did not buy it," she admitted. "I lost my appetite." Ethan nodded slowly, something shifting behind his eyes. "She has questions about you, Lily. She asked why the powerful lady said sorry when other powerful people never do. What do you tell her? I tell her that sometimes people surprise you, that admitting you were wrong takes more strength than pretending you were right. He paused, weighing in his next words carefully. I am not ready to forgive you, but I can recognize what you did. It cost you something, going public with Webb's crimes. Members of your own board wanted you to handle it quietly. You chose not to. Victoria was silent for a moment, absorbing his words. Your daughter is very wise for 7 years old. She gets it from her mother, Ethan said, and it was the first time Victoria had heard him mention the woman who was absent from their lives. Rachel would have liked that you said sorry. She believed everyone deserved a second chance, even people who probably did not deserve the first one. He left before Victoria could respond, but something had changed in the space between them. Not forgiveness, not yet, but perhaps the first small step towards something that might eventually become understanding. The weeks that followed were not easy. Victoria restructured the management hierarchy, implementing new oversight procedures that would prevent another Webb from rising undetected. She visited the warehouse floor more often, learning names and faces she had previously ignored, forcing herself to see the human beings behind the productivity metrics. The workers remained wary of her, but the wariness gradually softened as they recognized genuine effort rather than performative gestures. Ethan found himself in an unfamiliar position, respected rather than tolerated. Patterson deferred to his judgment on scheduling matters. Younger workers sought his advice on everything from equipment handling to navigating difficult supervisors. He had spent so long being invisible that visibility felt almost uncomfortable. But Lily's pride in his new title made the discomfort worthwhile. Victoria noticed the change in him as well. The rigid tension in his shoulders began to ease. He laughed occasionally with coworkers, a sound she had never heard before, and sometimes when their paths crossed on the warehouse floor, he would nod at her with something that approached warmth. She did not seek him out. She did not want to pressure him or create an obligation he had not chosen. But she found herself scheduling her floor visits during his shifts, lingering near his station when questions arose that could have been answered elsewhere. She told herself it was professional interest, ensuring the integration of a valuable employee. She knew it was something else entirely. The breakthrough came on a rainy Thursday when the heating system failed in the warehouse's east wing. Workers clustered near the functional vents, shivering and complaining, while maintenance struggled with the repair. Victoria ordered an early end to the shift, sending everyone home with full pay. But the storm had worsened, and the parking lot had become a lake of standing water. She found Ethan in the break room, on the phone with someone whose voice she could hear faintly through the receiver. Lily's babysitter, unable to drive through the flooding. He would need to stay at the warehouse until the water receded or find alternative transportation. Victoria spoke before she could second-guess herself. I can drive you. My car handles floods better than most. Your daughter should not have to wait. Ethan hesitated, and she could see the internal debate playing across his features. Accepting help from her meant accepting a level of connection he might not be ready for. Refusing meant leaving Lily waiting in uncertainty while the storm raged. Thank you, he said finally. I would appreciate that. The drive to his apartment took nearly an hour through the flooded streets. They talked more during that hour than they had in all the weeks since his return, about Lily's progress in school, her talent for art, her determination to learn guitar even though their apartment had thin walls and patient neighbors, about Rachel, carefully at first, then more openly as the memories flowed easier than expected, about Victoria's grandmother, the woman who had raised her after her parents' divorce, who had taught her that power was meaningless without integrity. When they reached his apartment, Lily was waiting at the window, her face pressed against the glass. She spotted Victoria climbing out of the driver's seat, and her expression shifted from relief to something like cautious hope. The chocolate lady, she announced as Ethan opened the door. She brought you home. Victoria crouched down to meet Lily's eyes. I did. Is that okay with you? Lily studied her for a long moment with the same clinical intensity she had shown in the grocery store. Your insides do not look hurt anymore. Did they get better? Victoria glanced at Ethan, then back at the girl who had haunted her conscience for months. They are getting better. thanks in part to you." Lily nodded, apparently satisfied. She turned and disappeared into the apartment, leaving the two adults standing in the doorway with the rain drumming against the roof above them. "Do you want to come in?" Ethan asked, and the invitation carried weight beyond its simple words. "There is coffee, not good coffee, but coffee." Victoria smiled, and it was the most genuine expression he had seen from her. "I would like that." The coffee was indeed not good, but Victoria drank it anyway, while Lily showed her the drawings taped to the refrigerator door. There was the apartment building with too many windows. There was a figure that Lily identified as her daddy, tall and strong and surrounded by boxes because he worked so hard. And there, added recently in what looked like purple crayon, was a new figure standing beside him. A lady with yellow hair and a blue dress. "That is you," Lily explained matter-of-factly. "You are in the picture now because you said sorry and meant it. Daddy says that is rare and should be remembered." Victoria looked at Ethan over his daughter's head. He shrugged, slightly embarrassed but not apologetic. "She has strong opinions about who belongs in her drawings." "I am honored," Victoria said, and she meant it more than she had meant anything in years. The healing did not happen all at once. There were still moments of tension, of remembered pain surfacing unexpectedly, of trust that had to be rebuilt one small gesture at a time. But the gestures accumulated day after day, week after week, until the distance between them became something closer to closeness. 6 months after his return, Ethan asked Victoria to dinner. Not a business dinner, not a professional obligation, but dinner because he wanted to spend an evening in her company without warehouses or work orders or the weight of their shared history. She said yes. A year after that, Lily asked Victoria a question that had clearly been brewing for weeks. "Are you going to be my new mom? Because my friend Sarah has a new mom and she says it is okay to have more than one." Victoria and Ethan exchanged a look that contained multitudes. They had discussed this possibility in the quiet hours, testing its weight and finding it surprisingly manageable. But they had agreed that any decision would involve Lily as an equal participant. "What would you think about that?" Victoria asked carefully. "About me being part of your family?" Lily considered the question with characteristic solemnity. "You make Daddy smile, and you always remember that I like my grilled cheese cut into triangles, not squares." She nodded once decisively. "I think it would be okay, but you have to promise to keep saying sorry when you are wrong. That is important." Victoria knelt down and took Lily's hands in her own, just as Ethan had done the night the accusations first fell. "I promise, and I promise to keep trying to be the person you deserve. Both of you." The wedding was small, held in the backyard of a house they had purchased together in the nicer part of Cedar Falls. Patterson served as best man. Victoria's grandmother, frail but beaming, sat in the front row. And Lily, wearing a dress she had picked out herself and carrying flowers from the garden, stood between them as they exchanged vows. "I came into your life as someone who hurt you," Victoria said, her voice steady despite the tears she refused to wipe away. "I was careless with my power and blind to my prejudices. You taught me that strength is not about certainty. It is about admitting when you are wrong and doing the work to become better. I do not deserve the gift of your forgiveness, but I will spend the rest of my life trying to earn it." Ethan took her hands, rough calluses meeting soft palms, and smiled, the smile that had taken him so long to recover. "Rachel used to say that the best people are the ones who grow. She would have liked you, and she would have been grateful that Lily has someone who loves her as much as you do. I choose this. I choose you, not because I have forgotten what happened, but because I have watched you become someone worth choosing." Lily tugged at both their sleeves, impatient with the adult ceremony. "Can we be a family now? The cake has been waiting for a really long time." They laughed, all three of them, and in that laughter was everything the past 2 years had cost them, and everything the future promised to give. They were not a perfect family. They were a family built from wreckage and redemption, from mistakes acknowledged and trust painstakingly rebuilt. But as Lily reached up to take both their hands, standing between them like a bridge connecting two shores, they knew that imperfect was more than enough. The CEO who had once wielded power carelessly had learned to hold it gently. The single father who had endured in silence had found a voice worth raising. And the little girl who had asked if the powerful lady's insides hurt could finally see in the faces of the two people who loved her most that healing was always possible. All it required was the courage to. In the echoing warehouse of Whitmore Logistics, Ethan Cole, a devoted single dad enduring endless shifts to shield his daughter Lily from hardship, faced the at-the-moment betrayal when CEO Victoria Whitmore, blinded by unchecked power and fabricated evidence, publicly accused him of theft and fired him on the spot. In that crushing moment, with Lily's small hand in his and her trusting eyes searching his face, Ethan chose silence over rage. Not weakness, but the fierce love of a father refusing to drag his child through a fight that might cost her more than him. Wrongly cast out, he scraped by on grueling labor jobs, his world shrinking to survival while protecting Lily's innocence. Victoria, haunted by Lily's innocent question, "Do your insides hurt?" began unraveling the lies. Confronted by her own careless wielding of authority, she exposed the true thief, publicly admitted her grave mistake, and worked tirelessly to restore Ethan's name, job, and dignity. This raw journey reveals a soul-stirring life lesson. True power isn't in titles or swift judgments. It's in the humility to admit wrong, the courage to make amends, and the quiet strength to choose kindness amid injustice. Ethan teaches us that integrity shines brightest in silence and sacrifice. Victoria shows that real leadership bends to heal what it once broke. In a world quick to condemn and slow to forgive, dare to question your assumptions, extend grace before ruin. And remember, one act of accountability can rebuild shattered lives. If Ethan's unbreakable love for Lily, Victoria's painful awakening, or Lily's profound "do your insides hurt" pierced your heart, if it reminded you of a time power was misused or mercy was shown, share that raw moment in the comments below. Your truth could light someone's path. And if these deeply moving stories of redemption, quiet heroism, and chosen family restore your faith in humanity, please subscribe. More heartfelt journeys from broken trust to beautiful healing await. We'd be honored to share them with you.